So the government says, listen, this is a privilege. This is for the top people. And global entry is like a very precious thing. And we're not going to give it to black people. They commit more crime.
This guy's demented. This guy's a racist. But dude, thank God we stayed for the Tom Crash app. God bless. Oh my God. Thank you, Peace, for delivering this. I'm not saying it is the case. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But it's not something you can know. Personally, I'm not racist. That's my personal opinion. I'm not racist, actually. It's my personal opinion. Okay, so we've now finished Pisco talking to Tom about the Ethan Klein lawsuit versus Denims, Frogan, and Caseytron. Now moving in to Pisco versus Tom about the Hasan detention. Obviously, recently, Hasan claimed to have been detained at the border by CBP. And interrogated about his political views was the claim. Now, CBP and the DHS admitted he was detained, basically immediately. People still claimed that wasn't true, even though they had admitted he was detained. They said he was released. It's very clear he was detained from day one. He was still contesting the idea he was detained. Now, later on, Hasan got a letter explaining why. Okay.
Sorry for interrupting the broadcast, but this is important. Will I be banned from the Discord if I call Sunday a rapper with one less P?
Probably not. You know, you can probably call Sunday a Discord. Sunday a Discord, okay? It's probably fine. I can't imagine that'll be a problem. Now, obviously they admitted he was detained basically immediately, so we all could have told that. And it wasn't very controversial to actually say that, but people claimed it was. People pretended otherwise because they're just liars. Now, Hasan did receive a letter that basically said he was detained because his pass had been revoked. Now, Hasan, I believe it was, he was approved for the pass last year. He had the pass in like May of last year or something, and then between the inauguration and when he went to France, his pass was stripped from him, and he didn't see the email. Stripped from him without reason. He asked for the reason. They say they can't give anything. They're not giving any more reason. Unspecified reason, basically. Which, you know, it's like, now at this point, it's like, okay, so they can't tell him why. They detained him, allegedly asked him about his political views, and it was stripped between the inauguration and the trip to France. And people want you to believe, in no way did the Trump administration, or the DHS under the Trump administration, or the CBP under that, whatever, in no way did they engage in viewpoint discrimination against Hasan by either stripping his pass or the subsequent interrogation/detention. In no way was that about his First Amendment protected speech. In no way. There's just some really great reason that they're just not telling everyone. They're just not telling everyone this really compelling, obvious reason for why they detained and stripped Hasan of his global entry pass. So Pisco took the obvious take on this, that reasonably we can probably assume it had something to do with his speech. Unless they're going to give us some reason otherwise, it's a Trump admin. We know what their policies are right now. It would make sense to believe this is to do with his speech. I mean, you should press, instead of jumping to the Trump admin's defense and saying, no, this was nothing to do with Hasan's speech. Instead, what you should do is go, this looks suspicious. We need more information, and put the onus on the government to push back against the Trump admin, to not just accept what the Trump admin wants you to think and help persecute their enemies. If you're like a liberal, you know, that's probably what you should be thinking. But people weren't, obviously, and Pisco was skewered for thinking this. So let's see if Tom does any better arguing with Pisco about this. I'm sure he will, right, guys?
What was the basis of the revocation of global entry, which happened in March? What was the basis of the stop? And what was the basis of the
remember when liberal communities online, like DGG, hated Trump and they thought he was terrible, and they didn't support him cracking down on people's freedom of speech, and they didn't support him doing Israel's every fucking whim, you know, striking Iran and shit, when they wouldn't support things like that. Anyone remember? Who remember?
These are factual questions. What is the most likely factual thing? And then there's the question of what's permissible, the ought of it. If this was the basis of the revocation, if that were the basis of the stop, if the other were the basis of the line of questioning, would we find that acceptable? So why don't we deal first with what we
Those
think
three
happened.
line of questioning, basis of stop, basis of
revocation.
revocation.
Right. Yep. So let's first talk about factually. They granted him his global entry status, full global entry status, not conditional, in February 2025. They revoked it less than a month later.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't given for a year. Sorry, it was both given and taken away post-inauguration.
It was random that they did that. I would agree, no problem. What are the odds that you think that the revocation that occurred in March
Okay, Max. Okay, Max.
was random? Less than a month later.
I don't think the revocation.
Shockingly,
was
Max, when I say liberals, I'm not talking about you. I know that might be stunning, Max. That I'm not talking about federal rape, lightning emoji.
unlikely that it's random. Yeah.
So do you think that it's likely, then I'll ask, that viewpoint discrimination played a role in the revocation of global entry in March 2025?
I think it could, and I think that I might even find it like justifiable. Yeah.
Okay. Before
High
we ask
voltage
whether it's
sign. High
justifiable,
voltage sign.
let's ask whether or not it is that. Do you think it's more likely than not that viewpoint discrimination played a role in the revocation in March?
I have no evidence to believe one thing or the other.
Really? So let me provide you some evidence, okay?
Really.
So the first piece of evidence. When he's ultimately detained, now this is after the revocation, okay? But after acquired evidence can be informative for things that happened before, correct? Right? So like if I stash a weapon 2 weeks after someone was murdered and they find the weapon, even though they acquired that evidence afterwards, it can inform what happened before. Fair?
I'm sorry. One second. Somebody is my mic going out?
On my stream, you sound good.
Okay. So apparently on my stream, there's issues with my mic.
You sound good on my end.
All right. Hold on. Let me turn off some of my filters. Okay. Yeah. Let me know if there's still issues. Chat and oh wait. Now I'm way too low. Oh crap. Yeah. They can't even hear me now with the filters off. Crap. Okay, I think that might be better. Let me know. It does look like
Excellent
it's like
things
clipping
happening
me out now, so I'll just have to stay really close to the mic apparently. Okay, so state the last thing you said again
so
right now.
You agree that like after evidence that occur that you gather after something can inform the thing that happened before, right? So I'm just trying to head off any notion that, well, because I'm pointing to evidence
Like,
after
you can't use ad hoc.
Well,
yeah, you
but-
can't use ad hoc. Right?
No, but I can
rationale.
use I can use evidence that acquired. So let's say, for example, let's say that Trump, in January 6th, he didn't order the National Guard at a given time, and then 2 months later, he admits that I wanted to overturn the country. I'm not saying that's what happened, but you would say, well, just
You're
because
saying you can update your opinion with
based
new
on things
information.
that happens after, right? Based on the
Yes.
for the thing that happened before. So I think a
Yes.
strong piece of evidence that the revocation.
Sorry to interrupt the broadcast, but important question. What is worse, being groomed into being a chaser, or to text little boys?
I think they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. It's hard, like it's like saying like what's worse, being stabbed or having a stab wound? You know? It's the same thing.
Was viewpoint discrimination,
Thank you for the 50 Danish krona.
or the questions that were asked of Hasan in May that related in substance to the Houthis, to his comments to about Rick Scott, to his opinions
Aiden?
about Trump.
Sorry,
That these questions of a type related to
You did this
the
yourself,
Houthis,
though.
related to Hamas, related to Israel, related to Palestine, related to Trump. That is evidence that supports that the fact that the revocation itself related to stuff of that topic. Okay? That's I think strong evidence.
You're saying the fact that the guy who questioned him at the airport, the fact that he asked questions about those things means that it's more likely that that had something to do with
With
the
the
revocation.
revocation, correct.
Yeah, the VidCon Diddy parties get into Aiden's head. All those VidCon Diddy parties got Aiden acting unwise.
I think that's very strong evidence.
So the reason I don't think it is because when I listened to Hasan talk about this, everything that he said,
The Oreo freak
like
off.
every response that he gave to them,
The Oreo and Stardust freak off he went to.
the response that they gave back sounded like a normal response. And the fact that he said he was trying to like give them a lot of information, see how much he could get away with, it sounded like he was giving them information that they were then responding to and asking about, and that this all had to do with just the interview in and of itself.
Do you think that Hasan like brought up his comments about Rick Scott?
I don't remember him saying anything about the Rick Scott thing.
He doesn't allege that he brought up Trump. He doesn't allege that he brought up the war. So no,
I don't remember him saying that they brought it up, but so this is part of my problem though, is that in the very first time he talked about this, he never said that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. He didn't mention it. Then he went to a college campus, I think in Chicago, and talked about this again. Never mentioned that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. Then I think he went on CBS or MSNBC, and then the first thing that he says is that they asked him about his loyalty to Trump. The later things that he said seemed to get more and more extreme and more like wild, to where if those things had happened, I would have been kind of like blown away at the first time.
In his very first video where he details what occurred, he talks about the chronology of the questions. But even just put aside the precise form of the questions, they're inquiring and probing into these types of matters. Rick Scott comments, Hamas Houthis, Trump support for war. That to me is strong evidence that the revocation related to those things, and that the stop itself wasn't just random. Let's deal with the revocation first. But that the fact that he is being asked those questions, I think, lends evidence for the underlying revocation. That is to say, there's probably a mark on his revocation that would lead a CBP officer to see that revocation. He's in the global entry line, and to see the basis of that revocation, and to ask questions about the basis of that revocation. And that is what I take to be very strong evidence, is that the topics being probed about relate to those views in the questioning.
So he also mentioned that at one point they pull out their he pulls out his phone and starts like Googling him and is bringing up stuff on like Reddit forums and stuff like that. Would we not think that that would be part of that? Is that he's just looking him up and looking at things that are being said online?
Yeah, I mean, so that would be even greater evidence. I would take that the fact that they're in real time, like searching his opinions to ask about them and inquire about them, that would be self-standing, independent evidence, unrelated to the revocation, that they're inquiring about his beliefs and they're treating him more negatively on the basis of those beliefs, and that they're using this opportunity where they don't need a warrant and where they've seized him to ask him these questions. So, but like that's one piece of evidence, is the questions they asked at detainment, the nature of the questions.
But if they looked it up at the time, that wouldn't be evidence that they already had these questions planned because of the revocation reason.
Right. So at the time of Hasan's revocation, they haven't asked these questions. Is that what you're saying? That's what I was getting at in terms of.
No, I'm saying, I'm saying that at the time when he was pulled out of line for global entry and he was asked, he did the interview, that in that moment, he says that they are Googling him and pulling up information on him on Twitter and Reddit and stuff and asking him about those things. So that to me says they didn't already have these questions planned. They weren't already like discriminating against him when they took away the global entry for these reasons. This says they're just
so Tom is suggesting,
he's telling them, he says, hey.
Tom is suggesting that they had Hasan Piker, okay? So someone is in global entry when they don't have a global entry permit. And US border control has no idea that there's someone in global entry that shouldn't be there. and they have no idea who that person is, and so they've got no idea that they have Hasan Piker in global entry without a global entry pass before they interrogate him. That's retarded. You think US border control don't know who's in the global entry line when they shouldn't be? Obviously they know.
Hey, I'm a big name. I do Twitch, and I'm do
Like,
political
airport's some of the most controlled places on earth.
commentary, and they're looking him up and trying to see if there's anything on there, and then asking him about the things that come up at the top, and that has nothing to do with why they revocated his stuff a month earlier.
So if you buy that, now it's consistent with the revocation rationale here that they could be looking up different stuff, other comments but that the revocation rationale, there's nothing inconsistent about having it apply to the rationale and also look up new stuff on your phone. There's nothing inconsistent about those rationales, just to be clear. But even just standing by itself independently, if they're looking stuff up on their social media and asking him questions related to his beliefs, if you believe that, then why isn't that a self-standing basis to think that he's being discriminated on the basis of his views? They're going through his views and statements and asking him questions about the Houthis. What would be the purpose of those questions if not viewpoint discrimination?
Wait, okay, hold on.
Yeah.
The reason, we might have to go to the last thing, because I think whether or not it's justified is like the important part, because if you think it is justified for them to ask those questions, I think it's justified. You just don't like it.
Yeah, no,
well,
so I'm asking
then
what's the most likely
we
thing.
don't have much of a conversation to have here then.
So do you agree that the most likely outcome for the questioning, either on the basis of them just independently looking, or I want to get to other evidence for the revocation. But you do believe at some point that Hasan's views influenced the nature of the questioning or the stop? That it's more likely than not that at least some part of this.
Yeah,
is
Tom immediately
influenced by
trying to change the
Hasan's
framing
disposition.
to, Pisco just doesn't like that they ask these questions. No, that's not what's being said.
Yeah, things he said, things he's done that would signal some sort of ideological alignment. Yeah.
So we agree that most likely his viewpoints did contribute to at least some of what's going on here. I want to just finish up real quick on why I think the revocation is also viewpoint based. So one is the questions that they asked at the stop. Another huge one is what was happening at the time. Okay, so there's two time intervals that matter, or two time issues that matter. First, it's the short window of time. It's from when he was granted in February to March. The fact that it was granted and then so quickly revoked would indicate some reason, right? Something beyond. He was just checked, right? He was just checked for all the normal reasons, for all the background reasons, and so something must have got to their attention for them to reach. Because this is not a common practice for you to have your global entry revoked so quickly after it's granted. That's not very common at all, and this is before he's even left the country, and so it's nothing that he's done abroad that's influenced this revocation, and so something must have triggered them to either relook and do it again. So that's one time interval that matters, is the fact that it was done so quickly after it was granted indicates to me a much lower likelihood of some normal rationale unconnected to his viewpoints, his prominent viewpoints, in that interim, that less than a month interim, that would cause a revocation. So that time window matters to me. If it were something like he spelled his name wrong, I would expect it on the first application to be rejected or something. If it was something that they're like, he present some other
also
risk.
There are options that you can give it. They can give you a reason for the revocation. They did not with Hasan, is my understanding.
Unconnected to his viewpoints, I would expect that on the first. I don't think that something happened in that interim, separate and apart from his stated commentary. If it's something he did abroad coming back in, where he lied at the border, or he brought in a banana when he wasn't supposed to
interrupt the broadcast. But if God didn't agree with me, why would I have so much good stuff? Woof.
Thank you for the 50 Danish kroner, Mira. Thank you. Huge appreciate it.
to bring in a banana. He lied about how much he was importing. Well, he wasn't out of the country in that interim, and so the fact that it was so closely granted and then taken away lowers the likelihood that it's some non-viewpoint based reason that was the revocation. And the other time window you have to consider is it was revoked in March, right at the same time that the Trump administration is unleashing all of these other viewpoint discriminatory frameworks in the context of immigration, both for citizens and non-citizens. In the context of non-citizens, green cards are being revoked for people like Mahmoud Khalil. even for obscure viewpoints, right? Like Rameza Ozturk, who wrote an op-ed. No one knows who the fuck that is. She had her student visa revoked and she was arrested right around this same time in March, where they're implementing this framework at the border and in the interior of the country, checking everyone's social media. And so the timing lines up there. And they're also revoking global entry of this guy, Chris Krebs, who was an enemy of the administration because he had said the election wasn't stolen. And so they're deploying this revocation of global entry to their other political enemies on the basis of their political viewpoints. And so that, combined with the short window of acceptance and revocation and the questions asked at the border, I think strongly lends to the notion that Hasan's stated views had an effect on the revocation. Do you agree that's the most likely outcome?
Again, I don't know about the most likely, but I think that it is.
Yeah, I haven't looked at any of the ceasefire stuff. My understanding is Trump declared the ceasefire, and Iran were like, we never even received a proposal. That is my understanding from what I've seen so far. I haven't looked into it.
It is likely
more than 50%.
Something that I would think is. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so we
sure.
agree on that. We agree on that. The question
the
is
reason
it
that
justified?
I have some problems with it, and I just want to state because everybody.
Oh, and Israel bombed Iran 30 minutes.
Everybody else that I've heard talk about going through the global entry line and having to deal with these sorts of interviews, they all said that it went exactly the same. They were asked similar types of questions and that they just kind of followed the line of like answers that they gave. They would ask about the answer, then they'd ask about that answer, and then just kind of go down a line over and over and over based on the answers that they gave. And so that's why like everything that he went through there just didn't sound out of the ordinary. Obviously, the revocation afterwards makes it sound a little bit different. But
the revocation before,
him telling us about the revocation later. Yes,
that's because he didn't check his email. I want to deal with the cope real quick. There's a cope from, and I know you're not saying it, but there are people who say, for example,
ceasefire, Israel bombs you, you do nothing. Erudition, okay.
Well, this show, if the fact that it was revoked in March and he was stopped at global entry, it shows that the reason isn't viewpoint discrimination, it's that it was revoked.
Yeah, Iran were literally doing the thing. They literally keep doing the meme as well. They keep doing the Fuentes thing. They're like, the world's going to remember this night for centuries. 5 rockets.
He just didn't check his email. But what I would argue is it doesn't really matter. If the revocation is based on viewpoint discrimination, then the stop, which is based on the revocation, which itself is based on viewpoint discrimination, would be based on viewpoint discrimination. Since the act of violating what I take to be the First Amendment, now we'll talk about that in a second, it's turtles all the way down. It would infect the propriety of the stop itself, which is based on revocation, which itself is viewpoint discrimination. Okay, but all we're talking about now is factually, and we agree, more likely than not, greater than 50%, that it had some influence on the revocation and even some influence on the questioning. The question is it justified? And my position is it is not justified under the First Amendment. That viewpoint discrimination is anathema, and that in order to justify viewpoint discrimination, you need to pass strict scrutiny. That's the highest level test there is under constitutional law. And we wouldn't accept it for a global entry. And so I'm curious, take any of the beliefs. Support for the Houthis, alleged support for the Houthis, and I think he probably does support the Houthis. Alleged support for Hamas. The comments about Rick Scott, position on Trump. Which of those opinions do you think justifies viewpoint discrimination and government discrimination?
All except for his positions on Trump. Even in the CBP details about how they decide whether or not you are eligible for this, they talk about the fact that there's it's all very general, and they even say this is purposely very general and broad, and we cannot give you specific reasons on where we draw lines, but that yes, one of the things is whether or not there is some sort of fear that you could be interacting with a terrorist group, have direct or indirect support for them, there's a lot of things like that to where they're, and I think that the global entry thing isn't something that I would consider some fundamental right that can't be taken away for a First Amendment thing.
Let's deal with that first. I agree. Global entry is not a fundamental right. It's a privilege. Okay. If the government said Democrats aren't allowed to get global entry, would that be a problem under the First Amendment?
Ooh. If who said it?
If the government said, new rule, Trump administration, global entry, we're revoking global entry for every Democrat.
I think that just because I don't think just because I think they can do it for a First Amendment right doesn't mean I think all First Amendment rights are.
Would it be a First Amendment issue?
Open and
Would it be a First
eligible.
Amendment issue to say global entry is a privilege? We think Democrats are more likely to do crime. We could be wrong about that, but this isn't a fundamental right to get global entry, and so all Democrats are banned from global entry. Do you think that would be a First Amendment violation?
I don't know about First Amendment violation, but I would think that it's like a unfair and unreasonable more so.
Well, I would posit to you that just because I'll give another example then, and then I'll posit to you. Let's say that they say no black people can have global entry; they're more likely to do crime.
Mm-hmm.
Equal protection issue under the Constitution. Yeah. Why? But it's not a privilege. Sorry, it is a privilege. It's not a right. So why would it matter if they said no black people can get global entry?
I don't even know if it's like an equal protections issue. It just seems like, cruel and unusual. And that is like, it's more so that they're doing something that just does not make sense, doesn't seem to have any utility to it, doesn't seem to have a good rationale to it.
You would just disagree. You would just disagree with it on policy grounds. You wouldn't say this is unconstitutional racial discrimination if the government said, hey, no global entry for black people. You would say, I don't agree with the policy, but it's legally allowed.
Yeah, the problem is that the entire thing, it would have to have some sort of like reasoning to where.
He just needs to drop it to the driving license example, right? So now let's talk about driving licenses, Tom. Let's build this back up. Driving licenses are a privilege, not a right. Would you be okay with Democrats not being allowed driving licenses?
You are less likely to be able to go through something with less security, be able to go quicker.
Yeah, they say black
be
people
able to
commit
like bypass
all else
everybody
equal,
else.
And you agree with this, right? You agree all else equal, black people are overrepresented in crimes, right? So the government says, listen, this is a privilege. This is for the top people. And global entry is like a very precious thing. And we're not going to give it to black people. They commit more crime.
Yeah, I would disagree with it on the basis on the
policy,
fact that
but
it's
you wouldn't-
irrational and that it's.
You would say I don't agree with the policy, but would you say it's legal for the government to do that?
Again, I don't. I think that like even the Supreme Court would disagree with it based on the fact that it's just not.
This guy's demented, isn't he? He's just itching for a chance to start dropping 1350. This guy's demented. This guy's a racist.
Reasonable that there's no like reasonability there,
No,
or
they would-
that
this
would be
is what the
cruel
court
and
would say,
unusual,
Tom.
to be irrational.
This is what the court would say. The court would say that the Equal Protection Clause, as applied to the federal government through the Fifth Amendment, so it's this reverse incorporation because the Equal Protection Clause is part of the 14th Amendment, and the Fifth Amendment is understood to reverse.
He's proud of
incorporate
himself
the
too. He's proud of himself. He's like, yeah, I got that one in there. Oh, they'll never know.
Protection Clause, so it applies to the federal government. But the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, by its terms, only applies to states. But what the Supreme Court would say is that a facial racial ban on access to like a privilege, and it is a privilege.
This guy does have
100%.
an ape soul. He's got silverback physiognomy and an ape soul.
Is subject to the heightened amount of scrutiny, and you're not allowed to do this. That because there's no compelling purpose that's narrowly tailored to justify racial discrimination. Think about the following, right? Like entrance
The
into
compelling purpose, I think, is the important part.
So think about Harvard, right? Harvard. So Harvard gets federal dollars, right, or whatever. So consider it a government entity for the limited purpose of doing this analysis. Even though it's not a right to get into Harvard, right? It's not a right to get into Harvard. But if Harvard said white people need not apply, Jews need not apply, notwithstanding the fact that getting into Harvard is not a right, it's still an issue, right? It's still an equal protection issue. So you don't get out of it just because it's a privilege. You agree, right? You can't do racial discrimination in that way for college admissions anymore. And even before it was, the argument was that diversity was a compelling purpose, and now we're done with that. And so now it's like you can't favor
Mind of
one
lion,
race versus
soul of
the other.
ape.
So just because entrance to a particular university is not a right, it's a privilege that you have to earn, doesn't mean the government can discriminate on the basis of something that's not allowed. And put aside whether you agree or disagree with the policy, it's unconstitutional to do it. It's unconstitutional to say to this.
But I don't understand why is it require being laid out like this? I truly like. How do you not get this? Yes, the government cannot discriminate according to the First Amendment. Yeah, I thought this is pretty clear. The government cannot discriminate privileges based on like protected speech. Like if you're saying something that is like you can't, because of something you say, not be allowed to get a driver's license. That's ridiculous, right?
Public university, black people need not apply because their scores are so much lower on average and because they're more likely to do crime. And you might disagree with the policy, but you should also disagree with the fact that it's illegal. Okay? You feel me?
So, do you disagree with red flag laws?
I don't really have much of a. I have some background in some gun laws. I haven't done the analysis for red flag laws, but in general,
I don't have background in any laws.
Yeah. So in general,
don't worry.
no. In general, I don't have a problem with red flag laws. Based on my limited
the reason I
understanding of
ask
it.
is because a lot of what you're talking about almost sounds similar to
No.
red flag laws and the way that they would like discriminate on somebody's ability to own a gun without them ever breaking the law, without them ever violating something, but purely based on like something that they said
Right, so
normally, and whether or not this is reasonable is normally what we're worried about. We would allow
So it's
this thing to be
it's a separate
somewhat
topic, but I'll address
anti-First
it.
Amendment because it is reasonable and has utility.
So it's a separate topic, but I'll address it. In the context of the Second Amendment, okay, there are some things that are just not protected by the Second Amendment, all right? They're not in scope of the Second Amendment. For example, coffee is not in scope for the Second Amendment, right? You're not dealing with arms. You're not dealing with guns or with arms that are protected by the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment also has this test from a recent case called Bruin, which looks to historical analogs for laws and basically says that certain laws, to the extent that they map onto some historical analog, don't violate the Second Amendment, right? So, for example, laws that limit access for felons to have guns have been upheld, or at least in dicta say they're upheld, by the Second Amendment. Because the Second Amendment just doesn't...
Literally, this is going to be freebooted for a minute because I know fuck all about gun laws. Obviously, you never have to think about anything like that. So...
doesn't protect it, right? First Amendment doesn't protect child pornography. First Amendment doesn't protect defamation. First Amendment doesn't protect, incitement, doesn't protect fighting words. So to look at the red flag laws, there's analysis about like whether the right is even
But
implicated
it's not,
at all.
just to be clear, those things, it's not because of like a speech issue, but more so because of a outcome because of it. It is because of like the reasonability and utility to this is different. Once you say something, there is an action that follows instead of it just being words that come out. It is the direct cause that comes from it when it comes to like things like defamation, things like,
check if this VOD is in Library of Congress. Listen, I trust Pisco, okay?
They're just categorically not protected because of a history and tradition in that respect. And for
I've never even had a single personal conversation with this guy, and I trust him. Okay, look at him. How can you not trust this guy?
Less of a look at the effects of it, and then to look at history. Right, like right now, the mode of the court's analysis, especially when it comes to gun control, has been to look for historical analogs. Okay, and so there are categories of unprotected conduct or regulations that don't infringe on either of the amendments, right? And yeah, we can have so the red flag laws, at least some of them have been upheld in a recent case. I forget the actual name of the case, but some of them have been upheld as acceptable and as having some basis and being protectable, right? And so there's a carve
Sure, but
out.
if you're going to appeal to the Supreme Court, why wouldn't you appeal to the Supreme Court on whether or not they're allowed to discriminate through CBP?
So I am. I think that there is that viewpoint discrimination is subject to the heightened amount of scrutiny, just like racial discrimination. Now, you can sometimes racially discriminate, okay? If the government was going to put on a play called Obama the Play, the government could put out flyers and say, we're looking for an African-American male to play the lead. If, for example, there were some virus, right, that only targeted black people, and it was this horrible, like, COVID times a trillion, maybe the government could even say, okay, different
don't say AIDS, don't say
if you're
AIDS,
black
don't say
because
AIDS.
of this compelling purpose, this virus, right? So, but it's a very, very strict test. That's what I'm talking about here. When I'm giving you the example of a per se ban on black people having global entry, you can think of some factual circumstances that would survive the constitutional test in that instance. But
Okay.
in general,
not in
in the large amount of cases, it's not going to survive constitutional muster. And so I'll give you an example, right? If the government said no Jews can get global entry, okay, it almost certainly would fail, right? That's violating free expression. It's making free exercise of your religion. It's making a category and discriminating on the basis of.
We could even go further with that. If they said no Zionists, that would fail.
A fundamental right, which is the right to practice your religion. Notwithstanding the fact that global entry is a privilege, the government would still be barred unless they could show that, I don't know, that Jews have this, there's some compelling purpose. I don't even know what it would be. In the factual context would need to be so extreme, so severe to justify that. And viewpoint discrimination is like that. Viewpoint discrimination is like these kinds of really, really high thresholds and bars to meet for the government. So I'll ask you.
Yes, but that's what I'm saying is that when you're talking about this, all of the examples that you're giving are going to be based on like reasonability and the utility afterwards, whether or not there's some great harm that comes afterwards. But when you're talking about discriminating against all black people because they have a higher crime rate, it is irrational. It is fallacious because you're talking about 6% of black people who are actually committing these violent crimes and then applying it to 100% of these people. This does not directly correlate from 1 to 1. But when we're talking about ideology, beliefs, things that you advocate
they're
for,
higher risk. But they're higher risk.
or these are direct one-to-one things that we can look at and say this makes somebody more dangerous.
So a question for you. Is there empirically more evidence for the notion that black people disproportionately commit more crime versus people with Hasan's viewpoints commit more crime? Which of those is more, which is there more empirical evidence for?
I don't think either one would matter because it's going to be individualistic.
Okay, so
and we know that it would be the other way around, that which is more likely, that we meet a black person and they commit a crime, or is it somebody who's going to be in favor of if somebody's in favor of terroristic activity or terrorists or things like that, are they more likely to be dangerous in some sense or have some sort of
what's the empirical evidence? What's that empirical evidence that someone with an American citizen with Hasan's viewpoints presents more of a risk? What's the empirical evidence?
Again, but it's causal. We're talking about causal. The people who support, people who engage in terrorism, it is causal that their ideology causes them to engage in terroristic activities. Somebody who engages in crime, it is not causal that their black skin caused them to commit crimes. These are separate things. Ideology is causal. Skin color is not. You can't discriminate based on things that's not causal.
So I'm not convinced. I think ideology probably motivates some people. And I'm not a racial, what is this? A racial essentialist or someone who thinks that race is this destiny or anything like that. But I don't know why that matters, right? Like, why does it matter that it's causative as opposed to correlative? Like, if we knew for certain that 99.9999% of Christians, let's say, or a certain, let's say, subset of Christians, that 99.999% of them were prone to terroristic violence, would it matter that it's not causative, that it's just correlative? No, right? You would say the government is justified. It would meet that threshold, right, of compelling purpose. It's narrowly tailored to this subset of Christians, and they have a high propensity on the based on the correlation, regardless of the causative. And so I don't understand why the causative nature of it matters to your.
Also, you could literally just make that causative very quickly, and Tom still wouldn't support it, right? Tom wouldn't support banning all Christians, even if it was like they were 99% terrorists and like all the terrorism is about like pro-life stuff, right? In that case, you would say the ideology or the religion is causative of the risk, but you still wouldn't support banning all Christians.
Analysis here.
Because I think in both cases, when we're talking about somebody who just agrees, like leftists who just agree with terrorists and black people who commit crimes, I think both of these are going to be very low propensities.
Right.
And that instead we would have to be looking at whether it is correlative or causal. And I would say in the case of the ideology, that is causal.
Wait, you
Skin color is
but you
not.
just said Hasan's ideology, people who have Hasan's ideology are probably much less prone to do this kind of shit in general compared to overall, it's a low propensity, people with those ideologies, to do crime, right?
Is this from the Israel videos? Dude, Destiny and some Israeli fan wearing a Metica hat. Oh my god.
People who share that ideology.
Yeah, to do crime, sure.
Yeah, or to be a threat. So I agree with you on that. And just like overall, right, you can't make that assumption about black people just based on a stereotype because the empirical evidence isn't there with respect to, out of the total amount of black people, it's a minority that do crime. You know, it's a small minority of the overall amount of black people and the people who have Hasan's view. So I actually don't understand what the empirical evidence is here for the risk. But even just put that aside, I want to drill down on one thing. The fact that this is a privilege versus a right, that's not going to change large amounts of our analysis, right? If this is viewpoint discrimination,
it does to an extent, yeah.
Why?
I think if they said that you can't fly on airplanes anymore, I would say that this is something that probably it might be a right to some extent, like, but I'd still think that this would be a huge violation if they said because of this reason you're not allowed to fly on planes anymore.
But
Whereas,
flying is
whether
a
or
privilege.
not you get to skip everybody else in the line, that's very different.
But flying is not a right. Flying's a privilege, right?
I think that being able to leave the country and having like freedom of association, freedom of movement, like,
is flying a right or a privilege?
Well, in order to have the freedom to go where you want to, you would have to be able to fly. Those two kind of are the same. I guess maybe you could take a boat.
Is driving a right or a privilege?
It is a right and a privilege, I guess.
No, it can't be both a right and privilege, right? Isn't the fact that something's a privilege is like to show that it's not a right? Like something can't be both a privilege and a right, right?
Well, okay, yeah, yeah, I guess I'll change my answer. It is a privilege. These are private businesses. They're like they can.
So driving is a privilege, and right. If the government said, for example, Hasan, because of his views on Hamas and the Houthis, and because oftentimes support for Hamas and Houthis is causative, let's say, of...
No way you thought driving was a right? It's a right and a privilege, dude. It's a right and a privilege. Linguist, by the way. Linguist. It's a right and a privilege.
Of doing this kind of terroristic violence and doing these massive car attacks in the middle of cities, Hasan, you're not going to be able to get a license because it's causative, and driving's a privilege. It's not a right. And so because you said this about the Houthis and Hamas, you don't get access to a driver's license. Would you say that's acceptable legally?
No.
But why? It's a privilege. And
Eliano R.A. I don't know how you say him. Go back and there is a whole history of Tom content, okay, on my channel you can go look at. This guy did call himself a linguist. He claimed he pioneered linguistic marketing. Okay. There is a whole long series you can enjoy.
It would be causative. Ideology does cause certain terrorists to drive cars into large amounts of people.
Because again, I do think that this is different when like he has to pay like a lot of money for this to like again be able to skip everybody. We're not talking about that would be more analogous to him not being.
It's not a lot of money. It's less than the ticket. I'm sure that it's like $100-something plus bucks. It's not a lot of money. I just did it.
Wait, $100+
It's
how often?
I think you renew it every 5 years. Hang on. Global entry cost.
I thought that you were paying like a monthly or yearly fine or something.
120
like
non-refundable fee. That's it.
That's it. Every 5 years?
I think you renew it every. How often do you renew? How often renew global entry? Every 5 years.
Sorry to interrupt the broadcast, but important question. Is Destiny sharing your illicit tape without consent a right or a privilege?
You can't help it, okay? You can't help it. Thank you for the 50 Danish krona. Huge appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Weird.
So let's talk about that. So
Yeah, I guess it's only something that only people who
It's
fly
both.
very often are going to use. So
It's a right and a privilege.
No, you could use it for one trip if you don't. If you really now, it's kind of a hassle to do it because you have to do an interview and shit.
I'm saying it's not. It's not. Yeah,
but
nobody's going to pay
it's certainly not
$150
It's
for
certainly
one time.
not this like inaccessible thing only for rich people. Plenty of middle class and even lower middle class people have global entry.
Okay.
So, but even if just put that aside, right? Like global entry on all fours, like why would you treat that differently than driver's license, right? In driver's license, it's 1-to-1, right? You have a group of people who ideologically it might cause certain people with certain viewpoints to drive their car through a bunch of innocent people and kill dozens of people. It's happened before in this country. It's happened in Europe. Muslim terrorists, Islamic terrorists doing those kinds of actions. But why aren't you willing to say Hasan, on the basis of his support for the Houthis or Hamas, should not be able to get a license, or that it wouldn't be legally a problem for a state to deny it of him?
Well, I mean, for the same reason that we have heightened security for every time people get on planes versus every time they get into a car. Like, these are very individualistic things. They're like, it's way more common that people are using cars versus using global
Why does that
entry. And then
matter?
the fact that what do you mean? Why does it matter that these
The
are
amount
you
of
can't
people.
Yes, that is true, DB Maxwell.
police
Yes.
every single time people get in a fucking car? You
Wait, no,
can't
but-
police every
okay,
time,
but
you
if-
can police whether
but
or
if
not they
they're-
get a license. But that's
But if they're different, if fundamentally the license is different than the plane, then why, and just the amount of people, then why isn't racial discrimination okay for global entry? Why isn't Democrat discrimination okay for global entry?
we just covered this. Why are we going back?
No.
Like,
You said fundamentally a driver's license and a global entry is a different thing based on like the amount of people who do global entry versus the amount of people who do driver's license. If that's the case for this example and why it's not 1-to-1, why doesn't racial discrimination
I don't even know what Sugarlock's
in
talking
the global
about.
entry context, why isn't that okay if these are just fundamentally different and you're able to do way more things with global entry? Why aren't you able to do racial discrimination? Why aren't you able to do Democrat discrimination when it comes to global entry?
I'm not okay. We'll stick to the car example because for the car example, yes. I don't think that people are able to. I don't think it would even be realistic to like have these on like case by case basis. Again, like this is like very individualistic. Like
Pisco has not replied to my DM.
and you wouldn't stop them from getting a license
Hasan,
either.
Yeah, no. Imagine someone said Hasan. This only applies to Hasan. Hasan is such a terrorist supporter.
Oh, that didn't read out. Thank you for the 499 Max. Hasan, I know you're a brown communist, but you must fight your urge to sneak lithium out of game and stop.
Such a Hamas supporter. We're gonna deny him a license. Okay?
Yeah. No.
No. Right?
So
Or yes?
as I said, like the fact that they're starting off with like there's already much more hype.
No. If you're saying Pisco's wrong on this, you're wrong. Pisco's right about this. Even for Fuentes. Fuentes liked to claim that he was put on a no-fly list and all this shit. He was put on a no-fly list for fighting with a fucking flight attendant. Even Fuentes was not so much of a radical Nazi insurrectionist, whatever. They did not put him on a no-fly list or anything. He was never, never faced actual government persecution. He said like crypto seized because it was like sus as fuck.
Like security when it comes to planes
lost-
because
You're not
now
answering my
other
question.
people are
God,
getting into
I
these
thought you
planes.
wanted to stay to the driver's license
What do you mean
example.
I'm not?
Yeah, so would you be okay with the state saying this is specific to Hasan? Hasan has such horrible views, so much support for Hamas. We're not going to let him get a driver's license. He's going to crash it into a bunch of people.
Yeah, I don't think that makes sense. The thing that they're not just afraid that when you come into the country that you're going to do something dangerous, right? They're still allowing you into.
Pisco accidentally saying Kuihman's name right once in that Twitter space reminded me of when right-wingers accidentally used the preferred pronoun for a trans person. Okay.
To the country, so they're not like stopping you from coming in, and they're more so like afraid that you can bring things in. They're I think from my understanding from reading about it is that even more so it is about
they're not
like
stopping you from
being
walking
able
everywhere.
to like
They even say, listen, Hasan, you can get a motorcycle license. You can get a moped. You can drive. So there are other ways you can go on the bus.
Okay, this
You
is
can go on
kind
the
of looping. It is just literally trying to explain to Tom that you can't viewpoint discriminate even for privileges.
train. You just can't do the car.
Yeah, no, I don't.
No, why
don't-
not?
I don't
don't
think
think
Pisco
it's-
hates me. I think Pisco hates me. I think he was trying. I don't know. Maybe he was trying to little bro me, or maybe he actually doesn't know how my name's said. I don't know, man.
Right now, I guess.
Why?
Because because again, I think that like flying in a plane is very different.
I don't think he hates me though. He brought me up first. He added me. I was on speakers on the Twitter space, and he added me first. So I can't imagine he's just like totally fucking hates me. You know, he can't totally fucking hate me already. Okay.
Thing. You're going out of the country.
If it's a very different
now-
thing, why doesn't it just?
It's rather because this is just like why I go through trying to like talk to anyone basically. This is what I have to go through. Where I'm like testing like, do you like totally fucking do you like hate me because you've heard a bunch of bad things about me or because I've gone after one of your friends? Yeah, I'm like just testing and it's just like every time.
Justify racial discrimination. They say this is very
because
different.
racial discrimination
so I'll give you an example. So,
fallacious. We've already been over this.
Okay, but isn't
because
it
it's fallacious? It's not reasonable. There's no utility to it. It doesn't make sense.
but
Ask
you
him how
agree
much
that
he
it's on
hates
all
me.
fours
Don't-
with the
don't
viewpoint,
message
like someone with
Pisco
Hasan's
on my
viewpoint is
blog.
very
Don't-
unlikely to do crime, just like a black
don't go
person
doing that.
in the main is very unlikely to do crime.
Yes, but I think the one is causal and the other one's not. These are.
I mean,
what
kicked
I
out
saw
of
from-
109 Twitter spaces. So true. For no reason, for no fault of my own, I've been booted from 109 Twitter spaces.
The causalness of it. So the fact that it's causal, the ideology, that to you is a difference.
Yes.
But it's not a difference with respect to the driver's license. If it's causal in one, and why isn't it a difference in the driver's license context? The truth is, you're uncomfortable with the driver's license thing because it feels different. It feels different to you, but there's no principled way to distinguish it. And if it's the causal nature of it, then it should be all the way down, right? You say racist, so you'll be able to distinguish it and just bite the bullet and say, yeah, if it's causal, you can do all sorts of, you can restrict privileges, but you're not willing to do that because it doesn't feel good to say you can restrict a privilege in the interior of the country. On the basis
No,
of viewpoint.
I keep trying to say no. I keep trying to say that like when you're coming back into the country, the thing that you're getting is like a faster pass to be able to go through to where there isn't
You keep
as much
describing
security.
what global
And
entry is.
that
I don't
they
need
want-
you to.
Hold on.
I don't need you to describe that.
I'm not.
Dude, wait, dude, I was almost tapping out. I was like, dude, this is looping. This is looping. It's just Pisco explaining something very simple to Tom, but Tom being very resistant to it because it means he's going to have to... Yeah, I did see Pisco fighting Drew Pavlo, yep. Because it means he's going to have to bite a bunch of bullets. He doesn't want to bite. They'll ruin his argument. But, dude, thank God we stayed for the Tom Crash app. God bless. Oh, my God. Thank you, Pisco,
To do that
for
because
delivering this.
it doesn't feel good to say you can restrict a privilege in the interior of the country on the basis of viewpoint.
I keep trying to say no. I keep trying to say that like when you're coming back into the country, the thing that you're getting is like a faster pass to be able to go through to where there isn't
You keep
as much
describing
security.
what global entry
And
is.
that
I don't
they
need
want-
you to.
Hold on.
I don't need you to describe that.
I'm not. Hold on. I'm getting through the fucking sentence this time. So as you're going through, they want people that they have like a high amount of trust for to be able to get the privilege so that they bypass the security. Everybody else needs to go through the full process of
Yeah, and
security.
they say we
when they're
trust white
coming from
people more.
out
They say
of the
we
country.
trust white people more. So because we trust white people more, black people need not apply. It's a limited group, and we trust white people more not to do this kind of thing.
I'm going to give the same answer.
Which is
every
it's
time.
not
If you
causal.
don't challenge the answer, I'm going to yes, that it's not causal.
there's
It's
no case on
fallacious.
that.
It's not reasonable.
no-
There's no.
Yeah, but if the causal factor, the fact of causality, is sufficient to
You don't... Wait. You don't... Okay. Gonna sound crazy. You don't know it's not causal. There isn't like 100% absolute guaranteed proof that there isn't just like, propensity for more violence in some races. Like that is not 100% proven out. You don't fully know. You can make a reasonable assessment based on the evidence you've seen. But that isn't something you can know. Okay? I'm not saying it is the case. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying. But it's not something you can know. So this causal correlative distinction doesn't actually... You're not saying anything. You're not saying anything.
Distinguish the racial discrimination at the level of global entry. Why isn't it sufficient to distinguish the denial of driver's license, which is a privilege and which can be revoked for all sorts of minor shit? Why isn't the causal nature of the ideology as related to driver's license different? Why is it different?
Because again, when you're coming out of the country, they are going to
They're
like
both
just the same. It's like
privileges,
no, hold
Tom.
on, wait, just
They're both
listen.
privileges.
I don't care. I don't care. You're not engaging with what I'm saying. I need you to actually engage this time. So I'm going to say this in a way that gets you to engage with it. When somebody comes in from outside of the country, they are getting searched. You do not have to.
Personally, I'm not racist. That's my personal opinion. I'm not racist. Actually, is my personal opinion.
Have what is it called? Reasonable. What's it called? Causal.
You don't need reasonable
What is the
suspicion. You don't
term
need
for,
a
like, when
warrant.
they-
Yeah.
Yes.
You don't need reasonable
Yes.
suspicion. Yeah, you don't need a
Yes,
warrant. It's
but
accepted as a war
because you're
crime.
coming in from out of the country.
Oh my God.
Yes,
Outrage.
yes. So when you're coming from out of the country, I don't care if you're driving, I don't care if you're flying, I don't care if you're on a boat. They get to search you
For any
Name
reason.
5
because
black
any reason-
people right now. Stylo. Babka. Eddie Murphy. Kenny. Spinal. And fuck, is it? It's Freddy that's half black, I think.
it's different.
For any reason? For any reason? Can they search you for any
I
reason?
always mix Freddy and Louis. I can't remember which one's half black.
Always.
Okay,
Always.
so they can
Always
search
they have to
can they search you because you're a Jew?
They have to. They search everybody. They
No.
literally search
I'm asking you,
everybody.
can they?
They're going
Can
to
they?
search everybody.
Can they? But they don't need reasonable suspicion to stop you or search you. And some people get subject to more searches. And you're saying that they don't need any reason. Can they search you because you're a Jew?
No.
No, right? So even though there's an exception to the Fourth Amendment, that is to say, you don't need reasonable suspicion, you don't need probable cause, you don't need a warrant to search, there are still unconstitutional searches that are plausible at borders, right? If you had a policy that said, we search black people extra, unconstitutional, notwithstanding the fact that the Fourth Amendment gives you this exception to reasonable suspicion and probable cause and a warrant requirement, there are still unjustifiable searches and seizures at the border, like a religiously discriminatory search at the border or viewpoint discriminatory searches at the border. For example,
even religiously discriminatory is something that is subjective. Like if my religion, we all know that I have this religion where we all believe that everybody should bring drugs across the border. That's our religion, and we all fucking praise everybody because our religion believes that everyone should be bringing drugs across the border. And I've got this fucking logo posted right on the bumper of my car. Yeah, I think that is probably probable cause to be able to search this person a little bit more heavily than you might somebody else.
Okay, I think I understand. So if there were a new rule, it said, new rule for global entry, U.S. citizens that are Muslims can't get global entry, that would be acceptable, right? It's causative.
Don't think it is.
Wait, how's it not causative? It's the ideology. They are radical Muslims. It is a radical interpretation of the Quran.
Sorry to interrupt the broadcast, but you say you are not racist. Does that mean you would be with 1/4 black Brittany Ventiorna?
No, but not because she's 1/4 black. Because she lives a nasty, nasty lifestyle. Everything was public. Didn't she live with that 4chan guy? And they lived in like a total shithole? Like totally just wrecked apartment. Messy as fuck.
Causative.
You think that religious ideology is not causative of actions?
I think religious ideology is. I don't think that that the religion is causative there.
Well, really?
I think that yes, we have tons of Muslims in America, and there's the highest people who are engaging in terrorist activity within the country are white fucking Christians.
Wait a second, but for white Christians, that's not causative. White Christian isn't causative. But here, beliefs in martyrdom and Allah, that's causative.
Wait, Christians believe in martyrdom? Christians believe in dying for their religion.
Okay, here's the question, right? Before you said Hasan's belief system is causative, and that's why you can deny, based on ideology, for global entry, but you can't do it for race because race isn't causative, right? And you fought and you said, yeah, ideology actually motivates to action. The problem is now you have the religion. Religion is like ideology. Religion is a type of ideology. And so when I say to you, just like Hasan's belief, isn't it the case that religion is also causative of violence sometimes and terror threats, such as the religion of Islam?
Yeah, but I think religion is too broad. Like that is just
It's
too
too
broad. There is
broad now. Wait, it's too broad.
something more
Oh.
direct within that is causative, because
Why is
the
it too broad?
religion in and of itself,
Dude.
because people who believe in these things don't actually believe in like violent acts like this. They don't believe in going out and engaging in this way, even though it's part of their religion. They don't.
But a lot of people with
religions are very
Hasan's
subjective
ideology,
in what they believe in, and they choose.
Yeah,
and,
but a lot of people with Hasan's ideology are also peaceful.
The guy Brittany Venti lived with freaked out and cooked a bunch of eggs with the shells still in the pan and ate them half raw in front of her screaming BC. She said he was skinny. It was amazing.
What? Thank you for the $10, Jimmy. Thank you.
Don't do violence, don't do crimes. Hasan, I don't believe, has a criminal record. So just, yeah, a lot of Muslims don't commit violent acts, aren't committed to violence, aren't committed to
I don't know all the Brittany Venti stuff, man. I just don't know all that shit.
criminality. Just like people of Hasan's ideology, whatever that is, aren't committed to violence or criminality. So it's on all fours.
Hold on. No. When you say committed to it, they believe in it. They believe that it's right. They believe it's justified. When we're talking about the Christians and Muslims, they don't believe in it. They don't believe it's right and justified. So it wouldn't be causal. It's totally separate.
Hey, but you can believe something
like-
is justified. I can believe that violence is justified or martyrdom is justified and not act on it.
Correct. Yes. But that's why I'm separating your analogy from what we're talking about, is that yes, even though it may not mean that they are 100% going to act on it, that it's still a very distinct type of causal
So belief in Allah,
differentiation.
belief in Allah, belief in Islam, any given Sunni, not all of them are going to be motivated to ideology, but a lot of bad apples are going to be motivated to do these kinds of destructive acts based on their ideology. And so this is such a privilege, and because it's causative in the cases in which it shows up, right? Where it shows up, it's causative.
I'm not saying bad apples. I'm not saying this. You're making it sound like there's like, when we're talking about Christians, there's a bunch of Christians that all of a sudden just one day snap and go out and kill people. Whereas I'm talking about, if there's a group of Christians that believe we ought to do this thing, this is a good thing. They say consistently, we ought to go out and blow things up. We think it's good to take down planes. We think people deserved 9/11. Yes, I think that those sorts of people are very different because they actually believe this is right and justified, and they have agreed with the violence already. So that is very different.
So people who agree with the violence. Okay, so let me give you an example. So let's
So let's imagine someone said Luigi Mangione was based. Do you think maybe they should be deported from the United States? Would you say that, Tom? That'd be awesome if they if someone let's say Luigi Mangione was based, they had their green card, their visa revoked. I think that'd be awesome, Tom.
Ideology. That's
Secret now.
what I mean.
So let's say a bunch of people who support the violence that's occurring in Gaza. These kinds of people who support that wholesale, and that necessitates a lot of civilian death. Would it be okay for the government to say anyone who supports the Israeli violence?
Mangione mogs Bushnell easily. I mean, that's just obvious. That's not even a difficult take. It's not remotely difficult. That's obvious. Everyone should agree with that, frankly.
Occurring in Gaza cannot get global entry. Would that be acceptable?
The Israeli violence in Gaza?
Yeah.
No.
Why not?
It's because it's being committed by a government, not random individuals.
Wait a second. So what you're telling me is that the First Amendment standard about whether viewpoint discrimination is acceptable, you would say that a standard that incorporates ideology, advocacy in favor of violence, that we should treat the viewpoint discrimination differently based on whether your support for violence is manifested through a state versus a non-state actor, and that is relevant.
Three people making the same joke about hate and chat. Just okay.
Viewpoint discrimination is acceptable. This is
We got it.
bullshit ad hoc distinctions that don't matter
How is that
at all,
not?
dude.
How is that? Is Hasan a state actor? Is Hasan a state actor? Should we be more worried about him
Oh
because
my
he's a state
God.
actor? No, he's an individual. He is advocating for individualistic civilian terrorism. That is, yes, that is a distinction. You keep doing these things
What's
where you're
the
trying
First
to
Amendment?
analogize
Okay,
things
so
that
what's
are
the First
not.
Amendment? So if you support, let's say you supported Hitler's genocide, okay? You say I think Hitler's genocide of the Jews is totally based. That's a state violence, right? State violence.
Jesus, Bisco, you good saying this on YouTube? Are you okay, man? Are we just like throwing our channels right now? I disavow that completely. I know Pisco didn't say it genuinely, but I want to make sure, as part of complying with the YouTube terms of service, that I state this is presented journalistically only, academically by Pisco, and I disavow the sentiment entirely.
And let's say and I think that it's justified when violence is committed against Jews. They say that, right? By the state. But they clarify by the state. If the government said, hey, people who support that aren't allowed to get global entry, would you support that? Would you say that's okay? That's state violence.
Probably not.
Why not?
Why would we?
So, because there, it's just on all fours with what I thought was the distinction. You said if you support state violence, it's different. You can't discriminate for ideological support for violence if it comes from a state. And so why would you be okay?
Yes. Again, hold on. It's not just the state. It's a fact that, again, is the part that I keep trying to explain, is that, again, they are trying to get a heightened security on them when they come through, that they ought to be searched, that they ought to be checked, and that when you are coming from out of the country, that is more likely that you are going to. I know, that's what I'm talking about as well, is that global entry stops you
look
from
at Tom's face, bro. He's going crazy.
search, that they ought to be checked, and that when you are coming from out of the country, that is more likely that you are going to. I know, that's what I'm talking about as well, is that global entry stops you from going through the quick pass where you have a lower level of security.
Every time you repeat what global entry is, everyone can see you're dodging. You don't need to recapitulate what global entry is after every...
Dude. This is awesome. This is great.
Every answer. This is very clear. On the one hand, you said it would be unacceptable for discrimination for global entry. Yeah, for global entry. So price in your whole description. It would be unacceptable to say supporters of the Israeli violence against Gaza can't get global entry. You say that's unacceptable. And I said, why? It's support for violence. You just said ideological support for violence.
Because of the
utility No. You said because it's support for state violence, and support for state violence is different. And then I gave you the example. Well, what if you supported Nazi violence, state Nazi violence against Jews? And they started to say, hey, anyone who ideologically supports this kind of violence by the state against the Jews in the Nazi context, that you can't get global entry. You said that would be okay, right? But
no, I said it wouldn't. I said, why would we?
Oh, okay. So you think that it would be okay?
Hi, my name is Tom. I am pro the First Amendment, which means states can't punish me for saying things. But if you are not part of a state, screw you.
I mean, to be fair, that would actually technically be how the First Amendment works. Obviously not in America, you don't get protected by the First Amendment. However, it doesn't protect. It's not like only views that are supportive of the state are protected. That's retarded, which is basically arguing. Thank you for the $10. That guy, 66, 8 times. Okay. Thank you. Huge appreciated.
It would not be okay to discriminate against Nazis who support the Holocaust to get global entry.
Yeah, again, if there's no reason to believe that they need to go through a heightened level of security when coming in from out of the country, there's no reason.
So wait, you don't think that people who believe that that event was justified would have a higher propensity, causally, for committing violence against Jews? Or committing terror attacks against Jews? You don't think that would be the case, Tom? There would be a causal link between believing that event was justified and having a propensity for violence against terror against Jews. Dude, what is he arguing?
To send them.
So this feels like special pleading. I'll tell you why. You're literally saying that it's more justified.
Nearly failed a QTE. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Goku thing where it's like, you know, the Goku QTE thing. Stylo, if you his Stylo here, he has that. Send it to me.
To discriminate on global entry to someone with Hasan's ideology than a literal Holocaust supporter and someone who supports Adolf Hitler.
Okay, why does CBP discriminate at all? Why at all? Why do they discriminate for global entry?
Wait, can
why
you
not
address
just
what
let everybody
the fuck
have it?
I just said and not dodge it? That is what you just said,
I
right?
I am, but I think that you're dodging what I. Yes, I am saying that. Now, why does CBP discriminate at all? Why did they do that at all?
I have no idea. It depends.
global entry.
It depends on the context. Many different reasons.
Like what?
So when you say discriminate, I take that to be viewpoint discrimination.
No, I mean, why do they discriminate at all? Like, my
general.
understanding is that this is all security issues, which means that they want you to go through a heightened level of searches and crap like that,
Yeah, so
you're not going through a quick pass to bypass that.
Broadly, CBP seems to be concerned with, they have multiple mandates. They have the mandate of importation of goods into the country to make sure that they're enforcing tariffs and duties, security into the country to make sure they're enforcing the immigration law, and also enforcement sometimes of other law when it comes to outstanding warrants. And so multiple different purposes that might cause them to broadly discriminate in the sense of that's a suspicious package. This person has a criminal record. If what you mean is not viewpoint discrimination, but a broader sense of discrimination, they fulfill multiple mandates. And so your question, very simple question, has many answers, which is it depends. And CBP has many mandates.
Yeah. So again, my understanding is that it's all security related, and that the reason that people have to apply for it is for a security related pass, so that they know that this person is trusted to bypass security, and that this is only like something that they do for people who have a very high level of trust, and then everybody else has to go through the higher level of security.
Hasan is not a terrorist. He has no criminal record, and the reason you said it's okay to deny global entry is because he ideologically supports violence. But
there's literally like no free speech law to argue over in the UK. Maybe if there was free speech law to argue over in the UK, I would be able to cover my own speech laws more. But there's not like some principled position from which you can mount a legal defense of speech in the UK. It is just like, I wish this law didn't exist. That's all you can do.
I gave you of a Nazi also ideologically supports violence.
Well, again, when you're saying that they advocate for it through the state, that they would just vote for the state to be doing this, but they're not.
Yeah, okay. It's slightly late, but I'm gonna pull this up anyway. But I can't even pull it up because it's the right format. We've come this far.
Hey, it's me, Goku! Is that all you got? Frieza? What did you say to me?
Not willing to go out and do what Nazis did, which is just beat up a bunch of Jews in the street and shit like that. Then these are different. Whereas Hasan is supporting groups like the Houthis that are these random pirates that are getting on ships and going out and engaging in terroristic activities as just random people.
That's a dumb
This is a
distinction.
thing that he thinks is good and justified.
Yeah, and Israel does, even though they're organized in, I guess, a different way than the Houthis in the sense that they're internationally recognized, they also conduct violence that kills innocent people, and there are people who support that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so the distinction is whether it's a state actor or not state actor, even if you support horrible violence by the state?
Because supporting the state does not make it to where we would think it's more likely that you're going to need a heightened level of security coming in from another country.
But why does supporting violence on behalf of non-state actors indicate that tendency? And again, now you're talking about tendency, not causative. You're just talking about percentages, and so I don't understand the empirical basis to make that distinction. But even
Wait, I'm not talking about percentages. I didn't say percentages.
So what's the, so
where did you get that from?
So why does one's support?
Why did you even say that? Where did they get that from?
Well, because the other conclusion is not good for your position, which is where are you getting that abstract support in favor of non-state violence is causative of or likely to lead to criminal violence on the people who espouse that, as opposed to ideological supporters of state violence. I just don't understand where you're getting the notion that the kind of support that Hasan provides to non-state actors, it has a greater causative connection to the actual deployment, his actual deployment.
Let's go with Destiny Contrarian streamer now. No one's being a fucking Destiny Contrarian. It's such a gay fucking narrative, man. Just people have gone way too insane with it. Even if you go, dude, literally, I actually did see like 5 minutes of Destiny's coverage of the court filing. He is literally at a less radical position about this anti-Hasan stuff at this point than a lot of other people. People have gone past Destiny on the anti-Hasan stuff. That's how bad, that's how fucking insane they've got. And they're deluding themselves into thinking they're right about stuff. Even this guy's sitting there going, oh, I don't know about this court filing, man. I don't know about this court filing. This seems pretty crazy. So the most he can muster, it's pathetic and fucking embarrassing, but like everyone else is totally fucking insane.
Some kind of illegal violence or something, versus all else equal, someone supporting a state sanctioned violence. That's what I'm asking.
Oh, sure. I mean,
I didn't actually watch much of the stream. It was to see that. I literally just went, I clicked the video, I clicked to the filing, I just like skimmed. I was like, what did this guy say about this file? What's the gist of this? And I was like, okay. Even this guy can't bring himself to full-throatedly support this dog shit filing.
To take it to percentages, yeah, we could say that somebody who believes in non-state actors engaging in political violence is going to be much more likely to engage in political violence than somebody who doesn't.
Basically impossible to defend. But if you looked at the discussion about it, you would think it's like insane. You'd think it's like the best thing ever. I saw even someone told me in my comments to watch Legal Mindsets coverage. It's like, you know, I understand every lawyer fucks up sometimes, but Legal Mindset was literally saying Destiny was on the hook for visual depictions repeatedly. Like, he kept reading visual depictions and saying it was about, and saying, oh yeah, the cherry stuff counts for this. But no, it wasn't visual.
Is the empirics for that?
I would say just about everybody who's engaged in political violence believed in engaging in political violence.
Wait, but someone who supports a state doing political violence would also believe in political violence. I'm asking you, where is the empirical evidence that someone who supports violence from non-state actors, political violence,
I don't know how you're still getting these two things mixed up. So when we're talking about the state doing something, I'm not worried about
I don't know.
this.
It could be that there is a good thing about a good case about the snark stuff. Just because I wonder what, like, the torrent site case law looks like, right? Providing links to view a piece of media, basically. Because like a torrent site is just providing you a download link for the trackers or whatever, right? They're not actually providing you the media. So I wonder what the law looks like there.
Individual bringing in weapons or anything, or engaging, bringing anything in because they leave that to the state. But if these individuals believe in taking this into their own hands and doing this themselves, they are going to be more likely to bring these things in for other civilians.
Have you heard of the Soviet Union? Remember the Soviet Union? There are a lot of people who said, well, if you support communist Russia, you're more likely to smuggle things in, to be a saboteur. And so I don't know where you're getting. Right now, we're at war with Iran.
Well, I'm not making that argument.
So what if you support Iran? Let's say someone is avowed support for Iran, says Iran is justified in attacking American citizens.
By good legal case, I obviously mean like legally sound. I think obviously it'd be fucking awful the internet if you could start suing people for providing links to your content off platform. Basically rapes all archiving.
Likely to smuggle things in, to be a saboteur. And so I don't know where you're getting. Right now we're at war with Iran.
Well, I'm not making that argument.
So what if you support Iran? Let's say someone is avowed support for Iran, says Iran is justified in attacking American citizens. Iran is justified in attacking Israel as a state organized violence. You would therefore agree that anyone who advocates for Iran and using state violence, political state violence by Iran, you cannot deny them global entry on the basis of their support for Iran, correct?
Yeah, I don't know why you would.
But Iran supports terrorism. Iran could attack American citizens. Iran could be sponsoring saboteurs.
Well, if you're saying
Iran could
Saboteur. Pisco, no! Pisco, no!
be
because you
sponsoring
support
agents.
Iran, but yes, if you're saying by extension because you support Iran, you also support Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, then yes, now it's because you support Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, not because you support
Okay, put aside the proxies. Wouldn't there be a state interest if American citizens publicly are avowing support for the Islamic Republic? Wouldn't we be more heightened concerned of, like, now Iran is saying they're going to attack Americans, that it's no holds barred. Why wouldn't this kind of, if you really care about the safety of Americans, shouldn't CBP consider an American support for Iran as a relevant consideration for global entry?
Yeah, I think that like people who believe in like individuals going out and handling things themselves is a different type of thought process than people who would leave it to governments to take care of these things.
Maybe it's different. I don't have an opinion about whether it's different in that sense, but grant that it's different. Why does it matter for CBP? Who's to say one is worse or better? Why would it matter for your First Amendment analysis, which is acceptable? You would say, okay, I will discriminate.
I'm not doing First Amendment analysis.
Well,
I'm saying that
But it's the government, Tom. It's the government. That's who the First Amendment applies to, Tom. They have to follow it.
Matter for CBP. Who's to say one is worse or better? Why would it matter for your First Amendment analysis, which is acceptable? You would say, okay, I will discriminate.
I'm not doing First Amendment analysis.
Well,
I'm saying that these people are a heightened security risk, and so because they're a heightened security risk, it makes it there is a utility, as I've said the entire time, reasonability.
Yeah, but that can't infringe on the First Amendment, right? Utility
that like there is utility to actually sending them through heightened security rather than giving them this high level of trust and letting them bypass this.
And that's not true of people who support like China, Iran, Russia.
How would it be?
Because people who support
I can be convinced me that they shouldn't have it either.
People who support Iran, China, and Russia probably are more likely to be foreign agents who are illegally, stealing American secrets. Maybe are saboteurs. Maybe are
saboteur. They keep saying it. He thinks that's how it's said. No, Pisco thinks that's how it's said.
Even, by the way, accusations and even indictments that Iranians were planning an assassination of Trump on American soil. There have been assassinations that have been organized by like India in Canada that broke down relations there. Other countries that are state actors have embedded agents into this country. And so why would this distinction rest on whether or not you support non-state actors versus state actors? And I think the difference is, I said Israel, and all of a sudden you're like, no, you obviously can't discriminate global entry based on your support for Israel. And now you're stuck on it.
I said the same thing for Iran.
I know. And you
I said the same thing for Iran.
And you said the same thing for the Nazis. But you're having to defend this line because it feels like special pleading. You're just trying to get to Hasan. That's what it feels like. It feels like
it's not special pleading. It's reasonability. All of this comes down to reasonability. Even when we talk about First Amendment, is it legal to say, I have weed in my car? Yes, you're allowed to say I have weed in my car. Does that mean that it's not now reasonable for the cop to want to come search you? Yes, this is reasonable that the cop will come search your car now. But you can say it. It's still a heightened.
Okay. Yeah, if you say, I am committing a crime, yes, you're going to investigate for a crime.
Level of security to push them to go and put you through heightened security.
If you tell the police you're committing a crime, you can be investigated for the crime. Yes, Tom.
If you come out and you say, I support weed legalization, I love weed legalization, I think weed should be plentiful in America, and that's your political belief, and you're coming back from abroad, on the basis of that belief, should CBP be allowed to search you extra?
Probably not. No.
Why not? Their mandate isn't just security, it's also contraband. Someone who ideologically supports weed is more likely to smuggle weed in, right? If it's causative, it's probably causative.
Maybe I would say like if you
Maybe. Dude, he literally can't bite the bullets.
have like support for like cartels and things like that,
No,
then yes,
no,
I
no,
would say
no,
that
no,
that
just
is
weed.
more
No, no,
positive
no, no,
than
no,
just
no,
like
no,
the
no,
general
no.
belief.
No, you
but-
support legalization of weed. No, I didn't say anything about cartels.
Right, I know. That's why I said no to your answer to your question, and then gave like a caveat to where I would support it.
Okay, but even though CBP, even though that belief weed legalization could be causative of smuggling, it could be that someone who supports weed legalization is more friendly towards weed, more likely to like weed, and maybe more likely to try to make the American people accept
More
weed
likely to be
more.
carrying it. They're more likely to be carrying it. Someone supports weed, they are more likely to be carrying it. Because they don't believe it's a problem.
Thereby
That's
bring
causative.
weed in. That's the same kind of analysis you're
So
deploying
that's
for
simple.
Hasan's views.
It is I to an extent, sure, but I find that to be like less reasonable, yeah.
Okay. Hey, I
Because
mean, I
because
think
we're
you're-
talking about the majority of the country now. We're talking about like I think the majority of the country thinks that weed should be legal
Okay, what
in America.
Vlad, what distinguishes national defense implications from like customs implications or like it's all border control? You think like ANCAPs, like an ANCAP, who believes that all weapons, all bombs, everything should be legal. That would be causative to being more likely to carry those things. Like you wouldn't be able to discriminate on that line.
So
And
now
there are states where
you're
it's
adding
legal
another
here,
factor?
but there aren't states where like terrorism is. No, it's
So you're-
reasonability.
so-
I'm
so-
talking,
so
these
another
all
factor
have something to do with being
is the
something being
percentage of
reasonable. These
support.
aren't another factor.
The percentage support for something that could be illegal, right? A lot of people support Legio Mangione, not majorities, but a lot of people support Legio Mangione.
You're playing this game where you're doing the what is it called, something's Loki.
Supporting Israel have national security implications. Yeah, but you can't. You're not allowed to explain why. Okay.
Wager where like
No, I'm
just
not.
because I can't draw like
I'm
specific
joking
lines
with this,
on
okay? I don't mean that.
reasonability that I am telling you, yes, these things obviously are more or less reasonable based on the distinctions that you're giving, and that like one is highly is going to be more causal than the other. That's just as reasonable. But now you're like giving me these other things that are very different and going to be drastically like even
I'm
percentage
trying-
wise different.
I'm
And
I'm not doing that. No. I'm trying to get some kind of neutral test that where I can predict, perhaps. I'm not trying to get to do a Loki's wager type thing. What are the things you look to, right? What are the kinds of things? In the course of this conversation, we've looked to a bunch. One is whether the belief could be causative of some kind of misconduct. Another is whether or not the thing that you're supporting is state versus non-state. Whether or not the thing you just said is upheld by like a large number of American citizens. You said most people in America support weed. I don't know why that affects the analysis. And so I'm not trying to pinpoint like one hard case where it's not clear. I'm trying to even just look at the broad set of factors that you look to see whether or not something is okay or not. I'm not trying to like remove grains of sand here. I'm looking at what I take to be examples, hypotheticals.
yes, but I think the reasonability between the two are so drastic that if you're not willing to admit this, then it has to be Loki's wager, because it doesn't make sense if you can't acknowledge that somebody who just supports weed legalization like the majority of America is different than somebody who believes that in terrorism.
Replace everything that Hasan said about the Houthis with Iran. I'm 10 toes down for Islamic Republic. I think Iran should be attacking Israel. I don't know that Hasan is saying that Houthis should be attacking civilians, but even just grant that he did say that. Let's say that Iran, he's like, I think that Iran should be attacking civilians. So replace all that with Iran. You would say not justified to deny global entry on that basis. And the basis, and the reason you're saying that is because
I think he has said that about.
Okay, fine. I grant it. I grant it. I grant it. But like, okay, you're saying you would not revoke global entry for the person who is on all else equal with Hasan, but it's Iran. And the reason is someone who's all else equal with respect to Iran is less likely to do X than Hasan. Fair?
Yes, because they're leaving it to the state, whereas people because Hezbollah people are, because the people who leave it to the state, if they're not part of the state, like this is very different. Whereas if they are in favor of individuals acting, and I'm blanking on the word, but it's like a Batman, like Spider-Man, like all these people who go out and do things themselves instead of calling the cops. Yes, that is like almost like vigilanteism.
Yeah, but what's the empirical case that someone in Hasan's position is more or less likely to employ vigilanteism than a Hasan who's supportive of Iran as opposed to these other groups? I don't understand why you can make the claim that one has a greater tendency towards any kind of thing than another. I think that just feels. It's not based in any kind of empirical claim. Even though Hasan has a very, and this is in the chat, Hasan has a very low likelihood of doing the crime himself.
I haven't seen any of the dickers crash out.
Yeah, but I don't know what the empirics are on somebody who says I have weed in my car.
Dude.
They actually, whether I don't know what the
doing the crime himself.
That man's just riding for Tom. Dude.
Yeah, but I don't know what the empirics are on somebody who says I have weed in my car. They actually, whether or not they actually have weed in their car. But I think it's reasonable to believe that that is the case.
If someone makes an assertion, that they are currently doing misconduct, that's not abstract support for something. It's an admission that they are doing the thing itself.
Yeah, it's an imminent statement of action or something. There's like some phrase there where you are making a statement of a thing that is occurring at that moment versus expressing an opinion about something. That those are two different types of statements, obviously.
Which is prohibited. That's very different than saying I support, like imagine you're at the board and say, do you support weed legalization? Yes, I do. Open your bag. Different than saying, do you have weed in your car? Yes. One is the misconduct itself, and the other is you're making an assumption that based on this viewpoint,
Tommy's kill Tony if there was nothing funny about it. Okay.
He's likely to do X.
Tony?
That's the viewpoint discrimination.
Right, but these are, I think this is even in case law. They're like the level of harm that comes from a discrimination versus like the utility in it, that like you have to weigh both versus each other. So even with your like car example, that like somebody's not being able to get to work on time, or like that they have that they'll have like a lot more weight put on their shoulders to get things done without a car versus not being able to go through global entry. We wouldn't feel like this is some like huge weight on them to where they're
now you're
missing
bringing
out
back
on
the
something
global
great.
yeah so now you're bringing back the global entry being like this kind of heightened privilege.
That's
Who cares about it? But again, you do care about it in the context of saying someone,
well, I'm not just using the word like privilege, but yes, I'm saying that like there are like actual lines I think that are drawn here.
Where you're backing up, we're in the world in which we're talking about the revocation of global entry specifically. And so we're not comparing to anything else. We're just comparing to different things that revoke global entry. So you don't need to back up and say, well, global entry is very special, very special, very, very, very special. No, I'm already operating your framework, which is fucking stupid, by the way. This is dumb. This distinction is totally meaningless.
Okay, dude, base.
Where you're backing up, we're in the world in which we're talking about the revocation of global entry
I've had less to say about this second half of the debate, I'm going to be real, because it's just like, I don't actually know very much about the fucking stuff, and that's the place Pisco's arguing from. So I'm kind of just, like what, I can't say more than what fucking Pisco's saying. Like what the fuck can I add? But it's good debate, pretty epic.
Specifically. And so we're not comparing to anything else. We're just comparing to different things that revoke global entry. So you don't need to back up and say, well, global entry is very special, very special, very, very, very special. I'm already operating your framework, which is fucking stupid, by the way. This is dumb. This distinction is totally meaningless. It's based on your priors about the Fourth Amendment. But again, grant what you say about the Fourth Amendment. It doesn't mean that there can't be violations of other rights just because there's an exception to the Fourth Amendment. And so we're working in the framework in which global entries is very, 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 very special, different thing. That said,
that is what Frogan said. And again, I can say it about Pisco, because Pisco's not a complete piece of shit. Pisco's not some fucking lunatic who's going to sue someone for just saying they don't have a lot to add.
I have to bounce in a second. I'll give you the last word. I do appreciate the conversation. I think that there's at least a lot of common ground on the Ethan discussion. I think if you examine the Hasan thing a little bit more, you would find that it should be troublesome to you. And these kinds of distinctions that you're offering, state versus non-state, causative versus correlation, this stuff isn't really, this is ad hoc, and it seems backward facing to match with a kind of, Hasan feels like a threat.
The people who watch Tom think he won this or something. That implies people watch Tom.
This has ever been challenged in court at all, but this is literally everything that even CBP states on their website, that is like what they're doing, what they're looking for, and that this is kind of the thought process that they're going through. And so when they're stating this outright, yes, this seems to be the process that is accepted. And if it hasn't been challenged in court, then maybe one day it will be, and I'll be totally wrong. But as of right now, yes, like it seems to be the legal and trusted thought process from the government. So
Hey, Tom, thank you so much for chatting, dude. We should talk again soon. I enjoy our conversations. I really appreciate also when we have disagreements. I feel like we don't get like negative of each other. Like I'll call you shithead or whatever, but I don't take it personally. I don't think you take it personally. So
you did call me a bitch when you told me to get in the VC.
I did do that. I
will find out. I will get on a plane next time. And
Pisco one. Find them. Okay. Damn, that's crazy.